What's up, everyone? I'm James Lynch. This is Early Look. Today's edition, we're going to be looking at the upcoming fight between Bryce Mitchell and Movsar Evloev taking place at UFC 288 May 6th in New Jersey. And this is going to be part of that big Aljamain Sterling Henry Cejudo card. Of course, took a big hit with Charles Oliveira and Beneil Dariush being off the event, but this is a great main card fight right here between two top featherweights. Really looking forward to this one. So we're going to get into it. And if you haven't watched the show before, I go through a bunch of different stats, a bunch of different intangibles, and I give you my preview and pick at the end, or my pick at the end, I should say. Some of this stuff may have relevance, it may not, but that's for you to decide. I just like to look at every little angle. Quick tail of the tape here, 16-0 for Evloev, 15-1 for Mitchell, 29 years old compared to 28, 5'7" to 5'10", 72.5 to 70. So Evloev going to have the reach advantage. Bryce Mitchell a little bit taller and just a little bit younger here in this fight. Let's start first with Thug Nasty Bryce Mitchell. He's supposed to fight Jonathan Pierce on this card, but Pierce is out due to injury, and now he's got a really tough opponent. And this is a fight that was actually supposed to take place, I think people forget, on the Rodriguez versus Lemos card in November of 2022. Mitchell ended up fighting Ilia Topuria in December, but these two were originally matched up. So a bit of familiarity with both fighters here, as this fight was supposed to take place last year. This is a 3-round fight. And as far as Bryce Mitchell goes, 15-1 record. He doesn't have a single knockout win. He's got 9 submissions and 6 decisions. He's the number 11th ranked featherweight. He's 28 years old, like I mentioned there. He's 5'10" with a 70-inch reach. So he'll have a 3-inch height advantage, and he is 1 year younger. He's a BJJ black belt. He's got performance of the night one time against Matt Sales, and he's got fight of the night one time against Bobby Moffett. Bryce Mitchell made his amateur debut way back in November of 2013, a fight he actually lost by submission. Did not make his MMA debut until January of 2015. Made his UFC debut in January of 2018. Of course, he was also part of the Ultimate Fighter Season 27. Didn't end up winning the show. I think people forget that. Brad Katona, of all people, actually submitted him on that show, but that fight does not count on his record, as that was just considered an exhibition fight back then. Some notable wins for Bryce in the UFC, who, by the way, Bryce has gone 6-1 in the UFC with 1 submission victory. Some notable wins include Andre Fili and Edson Barbosa. Some notable losses. He's just got the one, Ilia Topuria, in his last fight, where he was completely dominated bell to bell. That was a very one-sided fight there for Ilia Topuria. So Bryce Mitchell looking to avoid back-to-back losses for the first time in his career. He's had a couple layoffs in his career, something we always talk about on here because, again, may play a role, may not. Going from Tyler Diamond to Bobby Moffett, there was a 260-day layoff. And then going from Charles Rosa to Andre Fili, there was a 490-day layoff. Outside of that, he's mainly been fighting twice a year. The fight with Topuria was back in December, so not a big layoff coming into this fight. He hasn't really had any injuries or anything that's taken him out of any fights per se. Like I mentioned, Evloev was the one who was out of that fight with Bryce initially, and Jonathan Pierce in this case. But he did break his hand against Andre Fili. That's why there was such a long layoff going from, or wasn't that much of a layoff, but ended up going from Andre Fili to... Actually, I got this mixed up. I'm just looking at this here. It should actually be from Fili to Barbosa, I think, was the 490-day layoff, not Charles Rosa to Fili. I got that mixed up. My bad. So yeah, going from Fili to Barbosa, there was a 490-day layoff. Part of that was because Bryce had broke his hand in that fight. So that's one thing to sort of keep in mind there. Bryce has had a couple of close fights in his career. Let's go back to the Tyler Diamond one. There was a majority decision win there. It was at the TUF finale in July of 2018, TUF 27, that is. 6 media members scored the fight for Mitchell. 1 scored it a draw, and 7 media members scoring it for Tyler Diamond. So that's interesting because if that fight goes the other way, Tyler Diamond's probably still in the UFC. Does Bryce Mitchell get released? I don't know. That was a really interesting result there that Bryce ended up edging out. And then the Bobby Moffett fight, UFC on ESPN Plus 6 in March of 2019. 12 media members scored the fight for Mitchell. 2 did score it for Bobby Moffett. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. A couple quick stats here for Bryce Mitchell per UFCstats.com. Again, take it or leave it. Bryce Mitchell's striking accuracy is 59%. His striking defense is 57%. He's got the average takedown landed per 15 minutes for Bryce Mitchell is 3.26. So he does get a fair amount of takedowns in fights. He's got a 44% takedown defense accuracy, and his takedown accuracy is 44%. His takedown defense is 33%. So Not great against a guy like Evloev, who does take his opponents down at will. 33%, not great stats there. And Bryce's average submission attempts per 15 minutes is 1.7. We'll see if it plays a role here, but again, he's fighting a guy who is undefeated. So that's pretty much all you need to know about Bryce Mitchell. Did have a chance to interview Bryce before this fight, before the Jonathan Pierce fight anyways. So if you guys want to check that out, that's on the UFC interviews playlist. I'm going to try and get another interview with Bryce as well, talking about this new opponent. I did reach out to his management this week, so we'll see if I can get something for next week, because I am curious to see how much of an adjustment camp has been with the new opponent. So that's everything you need to know about Bryce Mitchell. Let's talk about his opponent, though. Movsar Evloev. Hope I'm saying that right. I looked it up before I got on here. That's how Bruce Buffer pretty much said it. So hopefully we're on the same page there. But you know, there'll be someone who's upset with how I pronounce that. But I don't mean any offense. It's just it's not a name that really rolls off your tongue, so to speak. So let's talk about him here. 16-0, 3 knockouts, 4 submissions, 9 decisions. He's the number 10th ranked featherweight. So he's actually ranked ahead of Bryce. 29 years old, 5'7" with a 72.5 inch reach. So he'll have a 2.5 inch reach advantage in this fight. He's the former M1 bantamweight champion. He's a master of sport in Greco-Roman wrestling, and he's part of NART Fight Team and American Top Team. Let me just do a quick check on his Instagram. I don't think he's in the US yet, or if he is planning on coming over. But we'll have a quick look here. That's always an easy way to figure things out. Oh, it looks like he is an American Top Team. Okay, good. He's with Grant Dawson. So that's good news for this fight. He's already stateside for this one, which is awesome. So that's good. Like I mentioned there, he's the former interim bantamweight champion. He's the former M1 bantamweight champion as well. He's had 2 successful title defenses. Evloev made his amateur debut, or did not make an amateur debut. He went straight to the pros in November of 2014. Made his UFC debut in April of 2019. Where is that? Right here. April 2019, fought Seung-Woo Choi. Bryce Mitchell already had 2 UFC fights at that point. So a little bit ahead of him in terms of that. He's 6-0 in the UFC, no stoppages, all decision victories here, and he hasn't any notable losses as well. Should point out, Choi, I think, is still in the UFC, right? Yeah, I think Choi's still sticking around, although maybe not. He's lost 3 in a row. Barzola's not in the UFC. Mike Grundy's not in the UFC. Nick Lentz is not in the UFC. Hakeem Dawodu is, although Hakeem coming off. He was bullied in that fight. And then Dan Ige. Dan Ige's his best win by far. I mean, that was a very, very, very good victory. Dan Ige's a solid fighter in that weight class. And Evloev just dominated him, right? So yeah, that's sort of his only notable win here, but good opportunity here against Bryce Mitchell. He's had a few injuries already in his career. Let's talk about those. He was supposed to fight Jamal Emmers in March of 2020. He had a motorcycle accident in that one. Didn't look like it was too serious because he ended up coming back in July, but that's why he was out of that. Ilya Topuria, people forget he was supposed to fight him back in last January. He had to withdraw due to that. I'm not sure if that was a visa thing or what happened. Actually, no. That, remember there was a fight too. I can't remember if it was that one specifically, but, oh no, it was Jourdain is what I was getting mixed up with. I remember Topuria had some weight issues, but that was in this fight. Evloev having to remove out of that. Too bad we didn't get that fight, right? That would have been an amazing matchup with Topuria and Evloev. Maybe down the line we'll get to see that one. And then he was supposed to fight Bryce Mitchell, like I mentioned last year, but had an injury in that one here. So a few injuries so far for Evloev, but again, doesn't matter. This guy is yet to lose a fight in his career. He's had a couple layoffs. We talked about it there with Bryce. We'll talk about it here with him. So going from Dawodu to Ige, there was a 357-day layoff, right? Going from June 12th to June 4th, almost a year later, I should say. And then going from Ige to Mitchell, they'll be had a 336-day layoff. But like I said, it doesn't seem to matter because this guy's winning all of his fights. He's had a couple close fights. Let's talk about those because, again, all of his fights have gone the distance, so some of them were a bit closer than others. Looking back on that Enrique Barzola fight, I actually looked at the scorecards for that, and you can go check that out on MMAdecisions.com to give you the scorecards here. That was back at UFC on ESPN Plus 20 in October of 2019. 5 media members scored the fight for Evloev. 4 scored it for Barzola. So that's interesting. Maybe that one goes the other way. And yeah, that's pretty much the only one he's had outside of that dominant performance, especially the Dawodu fight. That was a real clinic that he put on there. And some quick stats for Evloev in this one. Like I mentioned, he's got a 46% striking accuracy. He's got a 63% striking defense. So if Bryce is going to try and keep the standing, I don't know if he will or not. That's going to be a bit tricky. And then his average takedowns landed per 15 minutes. Listen to this, 4.83. That's got to be one of the highest in the UFC. 4.83 takedowns per 15 minutes. Comparing that to Bryce, who's got 3.26. So that's a big difference there. Almost 5 takedowns every 15 minutes. It's pretty incredible. He's also got a 71% takedown defense, and his takedown accuracy in terms of him getting takedowns is 50%. So some really, really good stats here. All right, let's get to the odds. We don't have them on all books, but Best Fight Odds usually takes the average of whatever books are available. I haven't seen too many books posted yet, but minus 260 is kind of what we're seeing for Evloev, Bryce Mitchell plus 220. So Bryce and tough again in the scorecards. Do I agree with the odds? I do. I think this is a really bad fight for Bryce Mitchell. I get it. He's got to fight, you got to fight who's in front of you, even rankings wise, it makes sense. It just, Evloev's one of those guys that his ranking doesn't really determine how good of a fighter he is. Like, I think Evloev at this point, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe we'll find out in this fight, I think he's close to being a top 5 guy, if not being a top 5 guy. And again, I know we don't have the opponents to sort of prove that, right? Because he's beaten the guys he's supposed to beat, but he's got one of these styles that a lot of guys have had a hard time figuring out, and that is just relentless wrestling and grappling, and that's tough to do. Now, Bryce is great on the ground. We talked about the ground game. We talked about the fact that he's got a couple submission wins, all that stuff, but and then also he was able to, again, neutralize Edson Barbosa when they fought. And, I think Bryce has fought the better opposition and all that. But Bryce, had some success in his wrestling as well. I just think Evloev is better. He's like a better version of Bryce in a lot of areas. Striking wise, I think that's probably 50-50. But grappling and wrestling wise, Evloev is just a better version of that. Not to mention the fact that, again, Bryce was training for a different opponent. And I guess Bryce has had the full camp, so maybe that's a bit of an advantage. But Evloev, I'm sure, was just chomping at the bit to get a fight. And here we are getting this one. Again, both fighters familiar because they were supposed to fight last year. But I think a pretty easy call here is Evloev by decision. Like, Bryce got absolutely destroyed in his last fight and finished by Ilia Topuria, but Topuria was lighting him up on the feet. He was battering him. Evloev's not going to do that in this fight. He's going to take him down. He's going to control him. Bryce is going to do his best off his back, but I don't think it's going to be enough here. I'm going Evloev by decision to get it done. Brings that juice down a little bit. I mean, I still think it's going to be, I don't think you're going to get plus money on that, but if I had to guess, I think Evloev would probably be closer to like maybe minus 150 by decision, but I just don't see him finishing Bryce with it just being a 3-round fight. And again, I don't think he has the stand-up to really batter Bryce like Ilia Topuria did. So I'm going Evloev by decision to get it done. And unfortunately, Bryce Mitchell is going to have back-to-back losses here. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Who are you picking in this fight? I think it's kind of an obvious one, but I'm curious if there's anyone out there picking Bryce Mitchell. Again, I like Bryce a lot. I think he's great, great interview and all that. And I know he says some crazy stuff, but he's awesome. I like the honesty there in a lot of his interviews, but I just think this is a really bad matchup for him. Had he fought Jonathan Pierce, I would be picking Bryce in that fight. I think Bryce is a lot better than Pierce, but again, you want to talk about dark horses in this weight class? That's Evloev, in my opinion. I think he is a guy that we will see at least contend for a title, at least be in that contender spot at some point in the near future. Follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. Make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel, youtube.com/Lynch on Sports. While you're there, hit that like button, hit that notification bell. And if there's any other fights you want me to preview that are coming up, I got a bunch of early looks coming out in the next little bit. So usually any main events, I'll preview those. But if there's any other cool fights you want me to dig into and preview, more than happy to do that. I'm James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.